I'm Jack Petranker. I'm the director of Mangalam Research Center and Mangalam Center, and the Center for Creative Inquiry. And tonight, the Center for Creative Inquiry is very pleased to welcome Stephen Fulder here. Stephen is a very well-known teacher of meditation and mindfulness. He's based in Israel. He is English, as you will hear in just a moment. He was educated at Oxford, and he has a PhD in molecular biology, which is not from Oxford, it's from somewhere else. But, and he was a lecturer at London University, but he's lived in Israel for many years. He's the founder of Tovana, which is the Israeli equivalent, if that's fair to say, of the Insight Meditation Society here in the United States. There's a very strong interest in Buddhist meditation and practice in Israel, and I imagine that Stephen will be saying more about that. He's also been very active in the field of alternative medicine and herbal remedies, and has written books in that field. And also in the desperate political situation in Israel, and I understand you're the founder of an organization called Middle Way, which is directed at that particular set of problems. There's so many sets of problems. So I know Stephen wants to say a little bit about the situation in Israel, so I'll just turn it over to him. And the setup that we have, I should say before I do that, is that Stephen will start us off with a meditation, is that right?
Well, I'll introduce myself a little bit,
yeah.
And the situation in Israel, etc. And then I'd like to guide a short meditation so that we kind of get a taste of what I'm going to talk about. And then I'll give a talk, and then we'll have plenty of opportunity for questions.
Right. So I will be, I'll lead off the question session. We'll do a little bit back and forth between us, and then we'll open it up to the audience. And afterwards, there will be refreshments right next door here in our dining room, sort of a reception. Oh, and we should mention that Stephen's book, which he's on tour right now promoting, What's Beyond Mindfulness, is going to be available for sale afterwards. And there are some flyers up here about online programs that you have, right?
Yeah, I'll mention that.
Okay. Okay, great.
Okay, so I'll kick off. It's an extraordinary situation in Israel. The organization that I started around 25 years ago, in a small country, 6 million people, we have 45 retreats every year. We have thousands and thousands of people of all ages, from the young people who go to the army and who, straight after the army, want to touch some spiritual life, to really the old people. We have Jews and Arabs, and it's a really alive Buddhist practice organization, which is quite extraordinary in a small country, and I don't think people really can appreciate how powerful the organization is, including doing piecework with Palestinians and Israelis. We send groups all the time. We work with cancer patients. We work with old people. And as I say, a strong practice tradition all over the country. There are groups and 45 retreats in the year, all done on basis of dana, donation. Nobody charges you anything to go into a retreat. It's all donation basis, and mostly volunteer basis as well. Volunteers look after everything, and we have 1 or 2 salaries. So it's just a very dynamic situation, and I want to give you two stories. I wrote this book a couple of years ago. It came out first in Hebrew, and in Hebrew the title is Daily Life Awakening. So this is not a beginner's book on ABC of mindfulness. This book is about an awakened point of view. What the awakened point of view that the Buddha talked about, how does it change our daily life from disease, aging, work, conflict, war, peace, and going into practice and going into awakening and into the subtle levels of sacredness. So it goes quite far. So I thought, well, there's going to be a few people in Israel that will have a book like that because it's kind of high level. It's all levels. It goes from the beginning to... It was #1 bestseller for 18 weeks, top of the list of instructional books in Israel. And because of that, I got invited, started to get invited by young people to pubs and bars all over the country. And I've been doing 30 of them up to now under the title Buddha at the Bar. And people with their beers, and I'm doing 15, 20-minute meditation with the whole pub, with maybe hundreds of people. It's all going to show the dynamic nature of Buddhist teachings have to be alive. They are not a kind of, no longer in the Western world, the Buddhist teachings are no longer something from over there, from the East. And Jack and myself, you know, we have traditions, of course. I mean, both of us have spent years in India, etc. So we, in a way, come from that Eastern source, but it's now in the street. And if it's in the street in Tel Aviv, it's in the street in a serious way, with people really seriously practicing, going on retreats, going into deeper places. So that's about the book and about my courses. I just started to online courses which are deep. They're not online courses about beginners. I do, for example, an 8-week, 8-session video course on self and no self, and it includes 8 meditations, 8 talks, 8 exercises, and it goes into the places where the Buddha essentially says, you know, to wake up, you need certain elements. It's not beginner's mindfulness. You need to go into a profound, transformative path, and it changes the way you look at reality. So tonight, I'm going to go quite deep also. So if there's things I say that you don't agree and you don't understand and they seem weird, it's fine. You don't have to, it's not something that you need to sort of swallow hook, line and sinker, as they say. You don't, but if something touches, let it touch. And also the Dharma, that means the practical teaching of the Buddha, the Dharma, is to be lived. It's not a theoretical teaching. It's something really to be lived that makes a difference when we get up in the morning, and how we go out in the street, and how we talk to our partners and our children, and how we are at work, and how we are with ourselves, and how we are with our inner silence and our inner noise. So that's the real down-to-earth, I think, in the spirit of the Buddha. And that's the way I teach, and that's the way the Sangha in Israel has developed, I think, so beautifully. So I'd like to start with 10-15-minute meditation, which will be a little bit related to the theme of the evening, which is self, which is the self, the me, sitting in there. So it'll be with some guidance. So you can just take a breath and let it out and sort of relax. And feel our 2 feet on the ground. And quite quickly kind of immediately arrive to this moment. It's a small jump from doing, thinking, talking, to being. And just feel very, very simply that we landed right now in our life. Nothing special to do. Nothing special right now to focus on. Sense of presence and being alive and being aware, and just resting in that place. After some time, of course, there will be content. Thoughts will arrive and pass by. Sounds, body feelings and sensations. And the content, the voices that make up our life, expressing themselves. So at this point, we can usefully just embrace the voices of the body. Whatever feels clear and simple, but with the same attitude of alive presence, aliveness. Maybe the touch of the hands. Maybe the touch of the feet on the ground. Maybe the gentle, soft flow of the breathing in the tummy, rising and falling, soft and kind and easy. There will be thought. We regard thought as just another aspect of energy, just like sensations in the body or the hands, sensations in the mind. Thought passing by. we connect with the voices of the body, the sensations in the hands and the feet, and the sense of aliveness in the arms and in the back and the shoulders, begin to get a sense that these are phenomena, are voices of life. And a sense that it's happening by itself. We are not in charge. We can't control the sensations of life. The touch of the hands, for example, it's flowing and changing constantly and not in our control. If we explore what the fingers are telling us as they touch, changing all the time. And we can get a hint of the same thing in relation to thought. Are we in charge of our thought? Thought arrives and leaves. We don't control it. There's a sense of ownership, my thought. I'm thinking about the future, the past, some picture, some memory. But actually, looking at thought, it's doing its own thing in its own way. And what helps is this deep sense of letting things be. Let the body tell us its stories. Let the mind tell us its stories. Let things flow and change. Let things be, let things go. take another deep breath and let it out. And slowly, slowly open the eyes. So thank you, and I'd like to kind of launch into the issue of the evening, which is basically the self and the non-self. And for many, it's not an issue. It's obvious we need a functional me to survive. A kid that doesn't grow a kind of nice, healthy self can be quite disturbed. We all need a nice, healthy self to get on in life. How do we get out of the way of a bus if we're not a self? So yes, the self is an operating system. It's like the operating system in a computer. The me is basically a kind of total operating system that runs the show of a human being, and maybe not just human beings. My dog has quite a good sense of a me in there running the show. The issue is that the me is transparent, that we don't see it, we just do it. So that the me is being done all the time. Our whole life we are busy manifesting ourselves, and we don't know that we're doing it. So our life is defined: coping, managing, succeeding, getting on, having less trouble and difficulty, we are in the end busy from morning to life serving the needs of this self. And we don't see the self that we serve. We just do it. We are being it. So we look through it, it's transparent. And it's a huge attachment. And the Buddha said, basically, unless you get to grips with that attachment, you will not be able to touch Nibbana. There is no way, the Buddha said it in different ways, there is no way that you can sort of go towards liberation if you are locked in a self-story and you don't see it. And the reason is that the self is a bit like this. So we look at the world through cracks. And the Buddha said, open that prison of the me. It's funny, I was just in England and I went to see one of my favorite Shakespeare plays, King Lear. And it's amazing because it's about this. King Lear just allowed his ego to just grow and grow and grow as kings do. You love me, you don't love me, you love me more, you should love me more. And it drove him mad. His self just expanded and expanded and drove him crazy as every change in life, he was raging against it. And the only voice of sensible voice that said, you're going crazy because you're blown up, your self is blown up, was the fool, was the clown, the fool, the court jester, if you like. And if you look at the play, the court jester is always feeding in a small message saying, you're destroying yourself. The self is destroying yourself. Cool down. Just stop that madness. And of course the king couldn't really cope with that message. He could maybe slightly, but he really... And the court jester has to be very careful, otherwise you get his head chopped off. Too much truth in front of a king. Too much truth to power and you get your head chopped off. Anyway, it goes quite subtle. We have to be careful. And I'm talking to you in a way, assumption of your interest in Dharma or in Buddhist teachings. We have to be careful that we don't put a load of self inside our spiritual life as well, so that the Dharma becomes, I am a Buddhist, or the Dharma becomes my practice, or I need to achieve this in order to be a Buddhist or a practitioner or okay. And a lot of reification, you call it, is happening around that. Also in psychology, we're really in a place which is going beyond psychology. But a lot of psychology is saying, let's support the self. Which is needed in many, many cases, but sometimes not so much. And non-self would really help where selfing is exaggerated. So it's essential to expand our consciousness beyond the self story. And it's fundamental. And it's almost the way you define spirituality. If you define spirituality in an authentic way, it is about spirit. It's not about selfing. And spirituality is about merging with the universe and becoming one with the universe, not staying with the duality of me here and the universe out there, and I want this, including spirituality. So it's hugely important. So where can we start to look at the self and to be able to understand the way the self works? Less transparent, just less seeing through it, but seeing the way it operates. And one of the places, I think, is in control. Because control is something that we can quite easily see. And the self, that's its big thing. It is trying all the time to control the uncontrollable life. It is busy trying to control things. And life is uncontrollable. So there's a fundamental mismatch, which you can call a friction between self and the world. The self has an agenda, constantly to control the world so as to be more comfortable, survive, so that I can survive. That's its agenda. So that creates a friction between me and the world. And the control is a way we can see it. There's a nice little story from a Russian author called Kirillov about a horse that's stuck in the mud. And the horse kind of heaving and pulling and trying to get out of the mud and pulling out its legs, and it's hard to do it. And eventually, after a huge effort, it manages to get out of the mud. At that point, a fly that had been sitting on the tail of the horse flew up to the head of the horse and said, "We did it." It's very, very sweet. That's the self. That's the self. The self is busy with control and with commanding. I don't know if you know the story of The Little Prince, where there's a king on a star, and everything that the little prince did, the little prince stood up, and the king said, "I command you to stand up." And the little prince, "Well, I'm already standing up." And so the king said, "You see, I'm the king, so I command and it happens. You see, you're already standing up." And so the illusion of being in control is a way we can watch ourself in operation. And in daily life, we really can watch it. A small example, defensiveness. So someone comes and argues with us. "I love Trump." And then we say, "Hey, You know, how can you say that to me? Or, I don't like you, you know, whatever. And immediately we notice the reactivity of the self that comes up with defense and reactivity. Reactivity is basically control. I don't want that situation. I want to shift it. I want to change it. You can imagine what happens in piecework in the Middle East. I'm a Palestinian. I'm an Israeli. Can create immediate challenge, immediate fear, immediate alarm, labeling, and so on. Intuitive, fast, strong, reactive, and you can see the self appearing, boom, running the show. So we need to shift the view and begin to, first of all, allow things to be less in control, allow life to be wild. I mean, you just think, and it sounds maybe stupid, but when you go to a restaurant, there's loads of them in Berkeley. I've just been wandering around with Jack, and we were looking at loads of places. That's the self. Do I like this? Do I like that? Do I have a good coffee there and not such a good coffee there? And that's a good place and that's not just a good place. All that choices of the self. But when we go into a place and we have our coffee or whatever, we're not interested. The minute it goes here, we're no longer interested. We don't say, my digestive system needs to be in control and it needs to decide. The digestive system is not interesting anymore. We're only interested in going to that coffee house. We don't know what, we don't care. The rest has to happen by itself. Digestion, elimination, breathing, you know, 90% of what happens is nothing to do with us. It's happening by itself. And we need to kind of look at that a bit more carefully and see how much happens. Even choices. We think, oh, I make a choice. It's me that made the choice. But if we look more carefully, and by the way, there's a chapter on choices in the book. If we look more carefully, choices are made by conditions that we find ourselves in, a load of conditions which we weren't in before. And then we have to choose between situations because of the conditions. The conditions say go here or go there. But it's the conditions that are actually controlling us. And then, yes, we have a chance to say A or B, but we forget all the conditions that made that situation. And choosing is often much easier with the wisdom of less selfing. When we say, yeah, there's conditions created this situation, but my bigger self or my bigger awareness knows we're going there, I'm going there. I don't need turning around in the mind, which is best, which is best, which is best, which is there. This is better, this is better. We don't know anyway. Totally unknown. Anyway, there's a radical shift in the Dharma. The Dharma will come, as the Buddhist teaching will come, and will introduce another way of looking at reality which is less dualistic of me and the world. By the way, Krishnamurti said a beautiful thing one time. He said the whole tragedy of human existence lies between the subject and the object. It's a knockout phrase. And really, we can practice being less dualistic about us and the world by really a sense that we are made of the world. We are made of the world. We are made of water and air, and the Buddha said again and again, all you are is a load of oatmeal wandering about on legs. It's really, he said it again and again in the original Pali Canon. All you are is a bunch of oatmeal, in English porridge, walking about. So who do you think you are? You're just made of food that you've eaten, and that's all. You're made of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen. Who do you think you are? So it's this sense of a bigger view of the self, which is a part of the Dharma, and being less invested in dualistic knowing. So dualistic knowing would say there are two sides to an experience. There is this side and the other side. There is me and the thing. There is me and the book. It has two sides of this experience. And that's dualistic. But are they really? Is that really existing like that? Can we challenge that? Especially as every single person in this room and in the planet, and not only every single person, but every animal is going to see the same thing in an utterly different way. So my dog will think of a piece of cake as horrible stuff, and dog shit as a piece of cake. It's just the way that the dog is. And so when seen clearly, there is a question around the act of seeing that doesn't need us to go into some automatic place of dualistic conviction. I am here, this is an object, I have a memory, it's called a thing there, I know what it is, and I am the observer and this is the observed. And it's something very, very closed in that. And the Dharma would ask us to open this experience. What's really happening? Like in the tradition of Zen, based on so-called story, myth, at some point of the Buddha just being asked a question, and he just lifted up a flower, and it was silent. And the thing is, what is this? What is this thing that I'm holding in my hand? Do we really know? We know what we learned, but do we really know? Can we really say what this thing is? So in our meditation just earlier, do we really know what the hands are experiencing when they touch each other? Is there a label we can put on it? Is it really hand? Is it my hand? It's already, by just 10 minutes, we already can touch, what is happening here? Is it my hand? My touch? Is it even touch? How can it be touch if it's changing every 2 minutes, every 2 seconds? It's another experience, this touch. So what is touch? So we really need to ask questions, and ask questions about the mind. When the mind looks at a flower, the mind is looking at the flower. What's really going on? Is it the mind? Is it the flower? Does the mind land on the flower? Or not? And this may seem abstract in a way, but it's not philosophical, because all of us that are practicing will begin to see that we live according to conventions and agreements. And a flower is just an agreement. Like I say, my dog wouldn't agree that that's a flower. Probably think it's horrible stuff. Everything is based on agreements, which we learn and we're conditioned. And so we're happy to have a convention of a flower, so that we can go to a shop and we can grow a flower in the garden. No problem with that. But while growing a flower in the garden, do we need really to stop there and say, it's a flower and that's the end of the story? Or can we buy our flowers and know something unlimited as we look at the flower. Unlimited, uncertain, a convention, a convenient fiction. This flower is a convenient fiction. It's convenient because we all need to agree, otherwise we'll never buy a flat, we'll never use we won't, like I say, we'll get run over by a bus. We do need the convenient fiction, but we still do need to see that it's a fiction. So this is not theoretical. This is this is something that spiritual practice, meditation practice specifically, and any direction that leads to wisdom will take us to these places of questioning the solidity of the apparent reality and begin to dissolve what we see as being fixed, permanent, done, with a name and a label, and that's it, unquestioned. All spiritual practice will begin to question that. And then the question is, that it leads to questions, then in that case, what is the world? If everything is a question, so what's the world actually? And the Buddhist teaching, I won't go into that here now because it's a whole huge story. And there's a course in my online teaching just about this called on Paticca Samuppada, which is the wheel of life, which is the 12 steps. The answer, the Buddha's answer to what is the world is Paticca Samuppada, meaning the conditionality and dependent origination. So that's a whole teaching which is very deep and very profound. But I think we can make it really simple by understanding that spiritual practice, and it doesn't need just to be Buddhist spiritual practice. I'm quite interested in Kabbalah, as you know, and this is the mystical side of Jewish life, and it goes in many ways a similar direction. And instead of me and the world as fixed things, me here, the flower there, the path would invite a sense of relationship. There is something between us. There is relationship happening between me and this flower. There is interconnection. There is something happening between us. But I don't need to fixate it and say, I am here and the flower there, and we define each other. And we see the whole of reality as interrelation and relationship. And it's a total relationship. And when we see things in total relationship, duality collapses. It's just not relevant anymore. And we can look at it directly, look at the self directly. And when we do that, we see the same thing about the me. It's not a thing. The me is a process. The me is a response. The me is a dynamic response to situations. It's a verb, not a noun. So I'm Stevening myself all the time. And Jack is jacking himself all the time. And it's happening very fast and with an assumption. So, we have an assumption. I'm Stephen and that's fine. But it's not. Because if we look carefully, Stevening is happening. When I wake up in the morning, Stephen appears again. It's a dynamic. So when we look carefully at the self, when we look carefully at the me, we can begin to break it down. Where is the me in this body frame? Where does it stop? Where does it start? I remember I grew up as an Orthodox Jew, and at the age of 6 or something, I began to quite early rebel against the whole thing. And I kept saying to my father, tell me, which finger, is this a Jewish finger? Where is the Jewishness? Where is the Jewishness? It's just a concept. It doesn't exist anywhere. I was trying to find it, as a young kid. This is not the subject of the evening, but I do want to bring up the tragedy of where this can go, this sense of the fixed me and the defense and the other. Because in the Middle East, there's been endless suffering, endless conflict for 100 years. And the strange thing is, Jews and Arabs living side by side, eating the same food. You hardly know when you've gone from an Israeli to a Palestinian village. They look the same, people live on the same land, drink the same water, eat the same food, neighbors. And where I live in the Western Galilee, by the way, we're totally at peace with our Arab neighbors. The Arab kids come and play in our village, and we go there all the time. And we actually not. There's no conflict where I live between Jews and Arabs. But the 100 years of intractable conflict. Where is that conflict? It's just in the story. It doesn't exist in reality. Two people living in the same land 100 years already, and they're living. And they're bringing up kids, and they go, and the Palestinian kid goes to university, and an Israeli kid goes to university, and it's in the story, which is so heavy and so emotional and so stuck and so much labeling that it's intractable. Nobody can stop it. And you can see the power and the tragedy of a story, how a story can just take over the mind of a whole people and then fuel so much violence and misery and suffering, and it's so unnecessary. In our piecework, we did a lot of piecework with Israelis and Palestinians, and basically the piecework was simply to listen to each other deeply, asking each other, Israelis and Palestinians. We did a lot of work in dyads, in couples, one Israeli, one Palestinian, asking each other, tell me about your life. Tell me about your daily life and your daily struggle. I want to know. And the Palestinian giving the story of there's so much suffering in the Palestinian community, Israeli also. And peace is made there. Irreversible. You can never look at that person again as a Palestinian threat or a Israeli soldier. He's just a kid like you, with mother, father, and struggles of life, just like you. So anyway, you can look directly at the self. You can ask questions, and you must ask questions. So mindfulness is really helpful, but it needs to go there as well. Not just being mindful of breathing and feeling calmness, that which is great, and feeling connected with yourself, which is great. No problem with that whatsoever. Mindfulness is a blessing. But if we want to be serious about spiritual life and we want to experience freedom, we have to use mindful awareness to explore the self and explore the transparency of it, and that it's really, we can't find it. Where is the boundary, really? Where is the self, really? Who's in charge of this breath? Who's in charge of the sensations? Who's in charge of a thought? So, of course we have an automatic reaction. My thought. My memory. This is my memory. But is it really? Or is it we just a habit of ownership? Is it my memory? Are we in charge of it? What are we in charge of? It needs to be challenged. There's a beautiful teacher, I don't know how many of you have met the teaching of Ramana Maharshi, and who asks directly, who am I? But it's not only Ramana Maharshi. This is fundamental in Zen, fundamental in Korean Zen, and the Buddha also would, in the early Pali canon, ask the same question: Atta anatta, where is selfing? Look at it. Look at the creation of this automatic function called me. Just look and see the way it's arising and dissolving. So the truth is that it's not an intellectual activity, and it's not a burden, because we actually want it. Something in us has a little bit of the touch of King Lear, that we do know that if we're too much locked in ourselves, we're like a king in a prison, in a castle. We do know it. We don't feel comfortable with too many boundaries and walls and defenses. Our life gets miserable if we're too defensive. We know that. It's funny when you say, people want a holiday from their work, and people say, I want to get back to myself. So you ask them, and where do you go to go back to yourself? Well, I go to the forest. The forest is a reminder of non-self, not a reminder of self. So to go back to yourself, or go and sit by the sea, in infinity. There I feel going back to myself, actually going back to non-self, because really, people really enjoy that sense of being less wrapped in the me. It's pressure, and so we do have a kind of natural interest in being lighter with ourselves. It's helpful to us. We know it. Other people will love us more if we're not full of ourselves. We know that as well. We will love ourselves more by being less kind of locked in what I need and what I have to have and what is better for me and what is not better for me, and giving ourselves a hard time. The stronger the self, the more we'll feel imprisoned by it. So we do know that, and we are. We have a motivation for this. So many people feel that it's all right up to a point. And I'm quite happy to meditate and to feel less wrapped in me. But I need control. I mean, how do I get on in life? And people say, how do I go to the doctor if I don't have a self? I mean, who's going to act? How do I act wisely if I'm less selfing? And I think it's a mistake, this question, because we're not talking about theory here. So we're not talking about theory of emptiness. It's not helpful to have theories of emptiness. I know it's very big in the Buddhist world, and especially in the Mahayana world, much less in the world of the Pali Canon, the Buddha himself. And we do take his teaching. We go back to that, in the insight meditation world. We go back to the Buddha. And the Buddha was really, really careful. And he said, no, don't put emptiness as an idea, because it will just trap you into another form of self. So instead of me, you've got no me, no me, no me, nobody, nobody, nobody. All you're in the same place. He said it's like catching a snake by the tail. The head will bite you. So no theories about self, no theories about emptiness, no theories about totality and unity. The Buddha was really quite against that. And I think it's also cultural, because at that time, Atman was the big Hindu teaching of the universal self. And the Buddha said, where is this universal self? And instead he said, Anatman, meaning anatta. There, explore non-selfing. Explore it. Look and see that we don't need to go there. So, but people do ask, many people, and maybe you are also. So, how do I act if I'm less of a self? What's action like from less me? And it's a good question. And I think the answer is, there will be decisions, there will be actions, because life is full of action, but it's coming from a bit of a different place. So imagine having to decide, I need to go to university or not to go to. I have to make a decision to get married or not to get married. If we leave that in the realm of self, well, big time trouble, endless turning in the mind and turning around and around and around and around and struggle. But if we feel, with less selfing, we will feel more connected to the world. And because of our more intimate relationship with the world and connection with the world, the decisions are made immediately. Because we are connected to the world, so the world is telling us, go there. There will be more intuitive sense of go there. And action gets easier with less selfing. We think action is hard. How do I act with if I'm less of a self? I need the self to know what to do and get up in the morning but it's actually not quite true. We are in relationship with daily life, with others, with what happens to us. And from that relationship, if we're really there in the relationship rather than in ourself, sort of locked in here, we will find things, we will know what to do. Yeah, I'm doing this today. Yeah, this is right. How do I know this is right? It's right. It feels right. There's a rightness about this action. And it comes from another place of relationship. And compassion is part of that. So compassion is needing less of a self. But compassion is one of the places of deep relationship with others. And it only can really manifest if we're less busy with self. And so it's compassion is about interrelation and reading each other and feeling each other, and from that place we'll know what to do. And from that place our heart will be open to others. So it's a bigger awareness. When we get less locked in self, the awareness expands. The awareness gets bigger. We're in bigger connection to the world, others, the dog passing by, the flower, everything. And because of that, we'll know what to do. So, another issue, and how long have I got? Another 10 minutes? I'll keep going another 10 minutes, okay. We assume that problems we have in life, I need to deal with, and I need to get solutions to them, and I need to get advice, I need to take medicine. I'm sick, so I need to go and take a medicine, go to the doctor, and all that needs quite a strong self. I'm lonely, so I need to go and find companionship, I need to deal with my loneliness, I need to work on it psychologically, and so on. And yes, it's true that we We need to help ourselves. However, there is something that can undo, can pull out the carpet from under our life problems, which is the selfing behind them. So yes, we can deal with specific issues we have in our life and problems, but there is another place, which is if we are less busy with self, then issues such as loneliness, or issues such as confusion, or issues such as shame or irritation, they lose their power because we actually go into the heart. So I'm not saying it's instead of, kind of feel lonely, so we go into a place of non-self, I'm just nothing, so it doesn't matter anyway. It's not like that. Of course we can deal with our issues. But at the same time, what I'm saying is having a real understanding of selfing and non-selfing can take the sting out of a load of our life problems. And a lot of non-dual teachers talk about that a lot, including Krishnamurti. I'll soon come to a close, and then we can have some dialogue. This is practice which needs to be done gradually. So we don't need to feel that it's an aggressive attack on the me. And if we go there, we might get into trouble. And there are really, I teach a lot of retreats, and occasionally you do get people that have a kind of intensity about their spiritual life, and then they can feel too quickly depersonalized. Their actually spiritual life works, but it's too much for them to handle in one go. And I remember many, many, many years ago, I've done a lot of personal retreats in India and other places. And I was on a 6-week personal retreat in a small room in an ashram in India. And I was just by myself for 6 weeks. My wife out in Israel complaining that I left her alone all that time. But I had this sense that right next to me was an abyss, like a total disappearing of the self. And I really wanted to jump into it. It really felt like I was on the edge of nothingness, and I wanted to jump. And I couldn't. Because the minute I got to that edge, I kept jumping back from fear. I can't go, but I want it. So, and there was a teacher around, and he came to visit me, and I talked to him about this, and he said, well, 2 things you need. One is your basic happiness. Just remember your basic okayness. So if you're approaching self and non-self and deep spirituality, you need to come from a place of okayness, of joy and happiness. And the Buddha talked about this again and again and again and again. Happiness as one of the sources of deep meditation. So the teacher reminded me about that. And then he said also, keep going to the edge and touch that edge and just go back and keep touching, go back, keep touching, go back. So what actually happened, you probably want to know. Well, after the 6 weeks, I realized the whole thing was a total construction of self and no self. There wasn't an abyss. There wasn't this great chasm that I was wanting to jump into. It didn't exist. It was a total construction. There was no place to jump. The Nibbana was there here as it is. There's no place to jump out of anywhere into somewhere else. There's just it was just a kind of a loop that I got into at the time. But it's just an interesting story. So there's a lot of teachings in the non-dual world, Advaita world. Nisargadatta Maharaj, the amazing book called I Am That. I don't know if any of you know the book. It's like knockout. There's a knockout teacher. And there are many teachers, I'm really connected to Krishnamurti from donkey's years. I was teaching Krishnamurti Center in India in the 1990s. But it's a huge inspiration, but we do need to be careful. And it isn't, we can get in the illusion that we just kind of have to believe in non-duality. And actually what we need to do is, I think, not only parachute to the top of the mountain, non-duality, Advaita, like ultimacy, go right to ultimacy, but we need to climb the mountain as well. And that's why, until today, the huge inspiration for me has been the Buddha, because he was able to teach both at the same time, step by step, and don't forget ultimacy, liberation. But you need to do the work, and you need to remember liberation. And the two work together rather than reading great non-dual book and just sort of jumping there. But then you get up in the morning, you go to work, and you argue with your boss, and it's not really working. Something there is not working. So we have to be, I think, have to be careful, have to be gradual about it. In pure presence, your language, pure presence is non-dual. Pure presence is just presence. And in its essence is non-dual. It doesn't really need an observer and an observed. It is just itself. Actually, I have a poem in the book, which maybe I'll read to you. And this is, I didn't think about reading it, but it just feels, because we're talking about presence, it just feels right. In the Jewish world, presence is called Shekhinah. And Shekhinah is the same word as Shachen. Shachen means to be a neighbor, or to be close to. And the word Shekhinah for presence is female in the Jewish world, the Jewish mystical world. And so she's called the goddess. The presence is called the goddess. And I just wrote this poem. Now, what in the Jewish world, in the normative Jewish world, which is sort of maybe not that interesting, they say presence has gone. We don't have presence anymore. That's why we're suffering. So the Jews would say the temple was destroyed and we're in exile and we're struggling and we don't have this goddess anymore with us. So my poem was an answer to that. Shekhinah, the goddess, means presence in Hebrew. She who dwells within. Many mourn her absence, but she is only absent when we are absent, which is most of the time. She is homeless when we are not at home. She is left outside when we shut ourselves inside our gates and our villas. But when we welcome the world in an unconditional embrace, Suddenly she is there, and here, and everywhere. And when we surrender to this perfect moment of appreciation and attention, then she unfolds herself in front of our eyes. And we truly know she never left, but was too close for us to notice. So, with that, I'll finish with one beautiful short comment of the Buddha. The Buddha was asked sometime, how do you recognize an awakened person? And the Buddha's answer was, you recognize them because you can't find them. And so the person asking said, well, I don't understand. Tell me. And the Buddha said, someone who's awakened, who has gone beyond the self, has gone beyond descriptions, labels, and language, and anything that is knowable in the ordinary mind. And therefore, this person, you can no longer find them, because all description have finished. And I think that's, it's beautiful for me, it's beautiful, inspiring sense of the subtlety of all of this. Let us be less findable, less definable and findable. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. So I'll ask a couple of questions to get us started.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then we'll open it up. So you said fairly early on that that we cling tightly. I'm not sure that was exactly the verb you used, but we cling tightly to the self, the story of the self, right? And that we need to let go of that story of the self.
Yeah.
So, is it a question of letting go of all stories, or is it a question of having a different story?
I think it's a question of letting go of the belief in all stories. Non-self is not another story. It is not believing in our stories. We can have them because we have a memory. Do you mind me reading one more small paragraph exactly answering to you?
Okay.
And to me, this paragraph in the book is the whole of the Buddhist path in one small paragraph. But it's exactly this about this question. But it's the question is not getting stuck in believing the stories that we tell about ourselves or the world, but not denying that the stories exist. We don't deny them. We're not doing censorship, saying, I shouldn't have a story. But we're saying, yeah, stories are just the shape of the mind, and I'm fine with the shape of the mind. So just let me read this small piece here. I live, and this is about me, I'm in the Galilee, so I live alongside lots of olive trees which have an amazingly expressive character that clearly shows everything that has happened to them. If a branch has been cut, or if the tree reaches out in a certain direction, or lumps are formed on the trunk, or dry weather makes the leaves fall, you can see it. The shaping of the tree is its memory, its sankhara, a response to conditions. The tree doesn't have a problem with that. And there is no reason why we should have a problem either. We are also just shaped, constructed by life. We are given a body, and it develops and changes dynamically according to conditions. And we arrive in each moment as we are. And the world arises and meets us as it is. And all we need to do is to appreciate it and let it be. Stories are just stories. Narratives are just narratives. And embodiment is just embodiment. If we let go into this flow of life, the wounds will dissolve, the scars will be softened and brought back to life, and we will find ourselves in the garden of the now instead of the prison of yesterdays. A difficult experience can come up, just like an unpleasant visitor arriving in our house. We can cry, and the next minute we can laugh, and then he's gone. Yeah, so you had another.
Right. Stories are stories.
Stories are stories.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had another question. You said at one point, practices like mindfulness of the breath, let's say, are very helpful, but we need to go beyond that.
Yeah.
And my question is looking for that transition point. How do you move from an awareness, let's say, of the breath or sound or whatever it is, into this kind of appreciation for the storying of the story?
So I think that authentic mindfulness will do the job because it opens questions. So open questions not as intellectual questions, but challenging fixations. So if we are mindful of breathing, we are also going to be mindful of our thought, and we will see that a thought runs in chains, and one thought brings the next, and also a thought has a very short shelf life. In 1 minute, 1 second it's gone. And we will begin to establish another relationship with thought by observing directly the nature of thought, that it passes by, that it's doing its own thing, that it's a lot of noise and it's suffering. But that is already the wisdom. And the same with, for example, in mindfulness, becoming aware of difficult or unpleasant and pleasant sensations. So if we're just in mindfulness saying, oh, this hurts, this doesn't hurt, this hurts, then we're not really being mindful. Authentic mindful would say, okay, this hurts me, my back hurts me now, I want to look and see what's happening. And I want to also look and see what's happening with my hands that don't hurt. And there is unpleasant and there is pleasant. And what is the experience of pleasant or unpleasant? And being less selective, I must have pleasant, pleasant, pleasant. But really becoming bigger than this pleasant, unpleasant. So I think in authentic mindfulness, it's already built in. And that we might start with the breath as a calming and so on, but if we're really doing it properly, then the wisdom will grow. That wisdom will grow by itself because it's opening the awareness to what's really happening instead of shutting ourselves down.
And would you say then that leads to, naturally leads to a questioning of the self? Is that, there's a difference between, say, going through the 5 khandhas, and well, maybe there's not actually. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That anatta the experience of less selfing will be there as part of a authentic mindfulness, if we're authentically watching what goes on, but it's more subtle. And so it is not really so easily available at the beginning. But just think, say we're mindful of being disturbed, right? So there's a noise and we're disturbed. Oh, they keep turning on the television, I can't meditate. The guy next door is turning on television, always making a lot of noise, etc., etc., etc. But wait a minute. I need to be mindful of disturbance. What is it in me that is disturbable? Being disturbed. The minute we are there, instead of complaining about the neighbor, we are actually watching that our disturbability, our tendency to be reactive and disturbed, we're already meeting the self. And we meet the self in its reactive mode with mindfulness. That takes away the belief in the self. Because the problem of the self is automatic. It's automatically, we're automatically inside the self. So we're just active. Shut up, you're making noise. That's the self in automatic, being an automatic. But the minute we bring mindfulness to reactivity of the self, for example, it begins a little bit to reduce the belief in self. But it's slow and it's subtle. So we're in terms of anatta, or the self, that needs quite a lot of practice to really make a difference. So we need to kind of keep going with it. We need to go on retreats and begin to see aspects of ourselves less serious and less believed and less total. And we see that, they come and go as well. Habits of self and so on. And that slowly does it.
Okay. Great. So let's open it up for questions.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions, but two really. First one is, what's the function? You're talking about the ego. When you use the word self, I'm not entirely sure. You mean the ego? Because sometimes they distinguish, but what's the function of it in your understanding, given the fact that it's clearly you need one to do anything? So why do you think it's there? Secondly, what's beyond mindfulness? It's interesting you've got a book about this, but you're talking about mindfulness the whole time, not what's beyond mindfulness. So I'm interested to know what it is you think specifically is beyond mindfulness.
Okay. So in the first question, I think I did mention it right at the beginning, that the self has a function, which is really to be the operating system of the computer. And it's the Windows that holds everything together. And so you can regard it as a mechanism for recruiting the whole body-mind to deal with life, whatever is needed. And so it's a reaction in response to life, a protective response to life. I purposely use the word self and not ego, because ego has a kind of Western historical definition from Freud onwards. And self is much bigger than ego. Ego would tend to be more of a psychological definition, whereas self would include, for example, a sense of boundary, a boundary of the body, for example, or agency, ownership, which is, many, many aspects of selfing, which is not actually just ego. So I would put the self as a much bigger. And what's beyond mindfulness? Yes, sure.
That's really incoherent with respect. I mean, if you're saying that the self is the operating system, then you have to have an operating system, so there's nothing beyond self. 2.0. Unless you say there's a 2.0 operating, exactly. You have to say there's another operating system or something else, otherwise there's no computer at all. I mean, you land up with a nihilistic position. So I don't fully get what you're saying.
Because I don't say that self doesn't exist in any way. I'm not denying selfing. I'm saying that we need to look at selfing and not believe it so much, and not be invested in it so much. But we need to function. The functional self is needed. The Buddha, when he was sick, went to a doctor. He didn't say...
Who's the we that's looking? I mean, you're begging a question, which is that we need to look at the operating system. But we are the operating system.
Yeah, but we're more than the operating system.
Okay, so...
For example, I don't think you can put everything in the box of the operating system. What about consciousness? Is consciousness, can you put that inside and say, that's also part? So the self is, I see the self as a functional operating system, like a hand. We need a hand. But I don't need to kind of, my hand must run things. It has to work, it has to do the thing, it has to dominate my life, and so on. I've used the hand, but I need to use the hand. So clearly we need to be operating from the self. But we're talking about a spiritual life here, in which we also need to see that it doesn't need to dominate our whole consciousness and our whole existence. And so what's beyond mindfulness? Yeah, I've been hinting at it in some of the... Here we have an issue of language, because in 1 hour I can't give the whole Buddhist path, and I've been practicing 40 years. And so mindfulness is quite a useful label, but actually it goes very, very far if you take it and maybe take it beyond mindfulness. For example, mindfulness will lead to wisdom, and the wisdom of seeing the relationship of things to each other, of seeing the transparency of meeting consciousness, of resting in consciousness, of opening the compassionate heart, of a way of seeing in a non-dual way, which is in a way beyond mindfulness. Mindfulness is a gateway into a garden, and the garden is a sort of real big ecology of relationships, which is the insights that keep coming when you're practicing. So it's mindfulness is quite a good label, but if to be exact, I think you have to go beyond it. Mindfulness is sati in the Pali language, and it means shining the light on things. But then, that's just the beginning. You shine the light, and then you begin to see things are passing by, things don't have any essence, things are bigger than I thought. Consciousness is the one that is knowing, the knowingness, shall we say, rather than the one. And also the heart aspect. So it goes into many different places. Yeah.
So in the beginning you were talking a lot about piecework and conflict, and I was just thinking about potentially if there's a distinction between working at the level of the story when there's kind of like these embedded, dynamics in like a cultural story that has led that to a conflict, and then the way to deal with creating peace when the threat level is like at maximum, when it's actually in the center of a hostile war-torn conflict, and how that type of suffering, where there's so much collateral damage, and there's kind of imminent death, like how can practice speak to that level, or is there no distinction?
No, I of course there needs to be other methods when you can't have dialogue, for example. If you can have dialogue between two people who label each other intensively, there's a possibility of undoing the dialogue. But if you're in the middle of a war zone, then dialogue can't happen. And instead you need other tools. One of them is kindness. And just seeing where kindness can operate. And another one is demonstrating peacefulness, that they're more of a physical demonstration. We did a lot of peace walks in the Middle East. And we walked, Palestinians and Israelis, walking through towns and villages, showing that peace is possible. And so there are many other tools. And then there are tools of just good-hearted trying to, repair damage. I mean, every situation needs its tools. So I was talking about it not so much because this is not a talk about piecework. This was really a talk about selfing. So I was talking more about the power of dialogue to undo the story and the label we have over the other. But clearly in situations that are beyond that, you need other things. And you need to act in different ways. And the Dharma can help you be steady and act in unusual ways, where everybody was sort of going off to get their guns. Then what's the opposite action? Which is demonstrating peace and demonstrating a different way of doing things, or helping others. And currently, quite a few people in the Buddhist world in Israel go off to the Palestinian areas and simply help the Palestinians harvest their olives, because they get attacked by settlers when they harvest olives. So just the presence of some of us guys there will help protect them while they're harvesting olives. And so that's a tool that's needed at that time.
We have time for maybe 2 more questions. Jackson?
Talking about just the method to it, to seeing the no-self, it seems to me like it's kind of invisible. Like I try to see Stephen A. or whatever, or the flower, and you can't really see it.
Yeah.
Is that the trick? You get to see it and then you can kind of get over it? How do you do that?
Well, in Zen, they say, try, and then when you're exhausted, it will happen. But I think one very basic Dharma practice is to basically fail to find the essence of things. So to try and see the essence of yourself. Where is this self? What is this operating system? And how can I see it clearly? And in a very classic way, it's unfindable. So you can look for it and look for it and look for it. But it's the same with the flower. Now, you really can look and look and look. But if you begin to look, what is the essence of this flower? What is the essence of it? What makes it the flower? Where is it? This bit here? Is that the flower? If I took that bit away, would it still be a flower? I mean, where is the flower? Actually, I took this bit away. Does it still exist as a flower? What is needed for it to be a flower? The whole thing is investigation, which fails in a way to find essences, and so that sounds quite philosophical. But the truth is that in meditation, and here I am talking about mindfulness plus, when you explore, for example, where really are my feet? And are they really mine? That's not an intellectual thing. do I own my feet? Well, of course, you could say that's an absurd question. That's a stupid question. Obviously, I own my... Well, who says? And where is that thought? And is it just a thought that I own my feet? And if it's just a thought, so maybe I have another thought, which I don't own my feet. So it's keeping this thing, basically what I'm saying is keeping alive the question, both in the simplicity of meditation and sometimes in a real questioning, the dream of life, should we say, this dream that we don't really know what it is, the unknown, we don't really know, and really meeting that dreamlike quality of reality. And that's all part, I think, will gradually open the non-self world.
Well, I think maybe that's a good place to stop. So
All right.
thank you so much. There are refreshments out there.
Anyone wants a book, it's
Oh yeah.
$15, and I've got some change, and I'm happy to sign if anyone wants to sign it. I'll sign the book as well.
Thank you.
Okay.